Okay, so as we begin our discussion on the differences between VSA and VSAN, I thought it appropriate to start right here in the VMware vSphere web client. Because I'm on the VMware vSphere web client, and you notice that I'm focused on a cluster, and then I'm on the Manage tab for the cluster, and then the Settings tab under that. And there's a whole section on Virtual SAN. There's a General and then Disk Management. And if I click on General, then I could click on Edit, and then click on Turn on Virtual SAN. Now, that's not all there is to it, as you might read in some places, but it's not the purpose of this training to get into all the specifics of the configuration. Really, what I wanted you to see is the fact that VSAN is built in to vSphere. So what's the difference between that and VSA, the vSphere storage appliance? Well, the name kind of says it, but I can best describe it by going out to PowerPoint for just a minute. So let's go out to PowerPoint and let's talk about VSA. VSA came with the 5X environment, starting with 5.0. And VSA is controlled by the VSA Manager, which is a centralized tool that we can see the whole VSA cluster. And the VSA cluster consists of 2 or 3 hosts. And I don't mean 2 or 3 hosts, I mean 2 or 3 hosts. If you build a VSA cluster that has 2 hosts, it has another service in it called the VSA cluster service that is not required if you build a VSA cluster that has 3 hosts. So the bottom line is, and what you should know, is that a VSA cluster for 2 hosts, right, with 2 hosts, cannot be grown to a VSA cluster with 3 hosts. And a VSA cluster with 3 hosts cannot be shrunk to a VSA cluster with 2 hosts. If you build it with 2, that's what it's going to have. If you build it with 3, that's what it's going to have. So what happens with the hosts? Well, you take, in this case, 3 pristine host installations. In other words, you install ESXi and nothing else. No additional virtual machines on it, no additional network connections initially. And then you install the vSphere storage appliance. As part of installing the vSphere storage appliance, you will end up installing one on each of the 3 hosts, and they will tie themselves together. There'll be several front-end and back-end connections that you'll create as part of the installation. And they'll tie themselves together. For what? Well, for storage and for redundancy of the host itself. The disk on which the virtual machines are eventually going to reside, the disk will be replicated on another host, such that if you lose a host or its disk capacity, you actually have the virtual machine files replicated in another place. These pairs of replicated disks are then presented as NFS exports by the VSA cluster. After you've created the NFS exports, then you wrap it back around itself and install virtual machines that use the shared storage of the NFS export. So what you end up with is shared storage without the need for a storage area network, without the need for a SAN or SAN expertise. But you say, well, we've already got a SAN, so do I need one? Maybe not. The VSA cluster is sort of a one-off kind of thing. In other words, it's not necessarily for everybody. It's for small organizations that can't afford SAN and SAN expertise, or it's for a small part of a large organization. In other words, you've got SAN in the main office, but you've got this other satellite office where you want to have shared storage, so you can do things like HA and vMotion, but you don't want to have a SAN there. That's where the VSA can come in. And so that's been the purpose of VSA all along, and VMware has always presented it as sort of a one-off kind of thing. Here's something else that you could possibly use. So now what's the difference between that and VSAN? Well, VSAN is a fundamentally different way of handling VMware storage. It may be a game changer. Time will tell if it is. But what we do is we leverage the local disk on each host and its solid state drives. We leverage the local disk on each host for capacity, and each host plays a role in that. Each host contributes to the capacity of the vSAN data store, and we leverage its solid state drives not for capacity but for performance. It's involved in read caching and write buffering. Everything goes to solid state drive first and then to the spinning disk. So with vSAN, you must have at least 3 hosts, and right now it can grow up to 8, but it's designed so that it'll eventually be able to grow to the size of your cluster, which currently is up to 32 hosts. So as you can see, it's going to have greater capacity than what VSA could have. So now each one of these hosts contributes to what will be created as a virtual SAN clustered data store. But here's the huge difference. The data store that is created is specifically for virtual machines. Up until now, what we've done is taken a data store where we could have put any kind of files and put the virtual machine files there. And we had different options for doing that. But this is a data store that was specifically developed for virtual machines. And what do I mean by that? Well, you can profile each individual virtual machine that is in the data store such that you have 2 or 3 virtual machines sitting right next to each other on the same data store with different storage policies. That was impossible. That is impossible with any other type of data store. So vSAN fundamentally changes the way that we store virtual machine files. So now you're either sold on one or the other or both. So you might want to know a little bit about the requirements for VSA and the requirements for vSAN. So that's next.